Hi everyone. We're really excited that y'all each chose to come and watch our Zoom today. We will be talking about Pride across the globe with the help of Professor Allison and her Global Pride class. I hope each of you enjoy this event and we are excited to get started.
So to start off, we're going to watch this TED Talk. It's about a gay couple that went across the globe to see what LGBT life was like across the globe. So I'm just quickly going to pull that up.
When I told my parents I was gay, the first thing they said to me was, "We're bringing you back to Taiwan." In their minds, my sexual orientation was America's fault. The West had corrupted me with divergent ideas, and if only my parents had never left Taiwan, this would not have happened to their only daughter. In truth, I wondered if they were right. Of course, there are gay people in Asia, just as there are gay people in every part of the world. But is the idea of living an out life, in the I'm gay, this is my spouse, and we're proud of our lives together kind of way, just a Western idea? If I had grown up in Taiwan, or any place outside of the West, would I have found models of happy, thriving LGBT people?
I had similar notions. As an HIV social worker in San Francisco, I had met many gay immigrants. They told me their stories of persecution in their home countries just for being gay, and the reasons why they escaped the US. I saw how this had beaten them down. After 10 years of doing this kind of work, I needed better stories for myself. I knew the world was far from perfect, but surely not every gay story was tragic.
So as a couple, we both had a need to find stories of hope. So we set off on a mission to travel the world and look for the people that we finally termed as the super gays. These would be the LGBT individuals who were doing something extraordinary in the world. They would be courageous, resilient, and most of all, proud of who they were. They would be the kind of person that I aspired to be. Our plan was to share their stories to the world through film.
There was just one problem. We had zero reporting and zero filmmaking experience. We didn't even know where to find the super gays, so we just had to trust that we would figure it all out along the way. So we picked 15 countries in Asia, Africa, and South America, countries outside the West that varied in terms of LGBT rights. We bought a camcorder, ordered a book on how to make a documentary, and you can learn a lot these days, and set off on a round-the-world trip.
One of the first countries that we traveled to was Nepal. Despite widespread poverty, a decade-long civil war, and now recently a devastating earthquake, Nepal has made significant strides in the fight for equality. One of the key figures in the movement is Bhumika Shrestha. A beautiful, vibrant, transgendered woman, Bhumika has had to overcome being expelled from school and getting incarcerated because of her gender presentation. But in 2007, Bhumika and Nepal's LGBT rights organization successfully petitioned the Nepali Supreme Court to protect against LGBT discrimination. Here's Bhumika.
Most of the I'm proud. I'm a transgender people. I'm so proud of my life. So on to the 21st December 2007, the Supreme Court gave the decision for Nepal government to give a transgender identity card and same-sex marriage.
I can appreciate Bhumika's confidence on a daily basis. Something as simple as using a public restroom can be a huge challenge when you don't fit in to people's strict gender expectations. Traveling throughout Asia, I tended to freak out women in public restrooms. They weren't used to seeing someone like me. I had to come up with a strategy so that I could just pee in peace. So anytime I would enter a restroom, I would thrust out my chest to show my womanly parts and try to be as non-threatening as possible, putting out my hands and saying hello, just so that people could hear my feminine voice. This all gets pretty exhausting, but it's just who I am. I can't be anything else.
After Nepal, we traveled to India. On one hand, India is a Hindu society without a tradition of homophobia. On the other hand, it is also a society with a deeply patriarchal system, which rejects anything that threatens the male-female order. When we spoke to activists, they told us that empowerment begins with ensuring proper gender equality, where the woman's status is established in society. And in that way, the status of LGBT people can be affirmed as well.
There we met Prince Manvendra. He's the world's first openly gay prince. Prince Manvendra came out on the Oprah Winfrey Show very internationally. His parents disowned him and accused him of bringing great shame to the royal family. We sat down with Prince Manvendra and talked to him about why he decided to come out so very publicly. Here he is.
I felt that there was a lot of need to break this stigma and discrimination which is existing in our society. And that kind of instigated me to come out openly and talk about myself, whether we are gay, we are lesbian, we are transgender, bisexual, or whatever sexual minority we come from. We have to all unite and fight for our rights. Gay rights cannot be won in the courtrooms, but in the hearts and the minds of the people.
While getting my hair cut, the woman cutting my hair asked me, "Do you have a husband?" Now, this was a dreaded question that I got asked a lot by locals while traveling. When I explained to her that I was with a woman instead of a man, she was incredulous, and she asked me a lot of questions about my parents' reactions and whether I was sad that I'd never be able to have children. I told her that there are no limitations to my life and that Lisa and I do plan to have a family someday. Now, this woman was ready to write me off as yet another crazy Westerner. She couldn't imagine that such a phenomenon could happen in her own country. That is, until I showed her the photos of the super gays we interviewed in India. She recognized Prince Manvendra from television, and soon I had an audience of other hairdressers interested in meeting me. And in that ordinary afternoon, I had the chance to introduce an entire beauty salon to the social changes that were happening in their own country.
From India, we traveled to East Africa, a region known for intolerance towards LGBT people. In Kenya, 89% of people who come out to their families are disowned. Homosexual acts are a crime and can lead to incarceration. In Kenya, we met the soft-spoken David Correa. David had a huge mission of wanting to work for the poor and improve his own government, so he decided to run for Senate. He became Kenya's first openly gay political candidate.
David wanted to run his campaign without denying the reality of who he was. But we were worried for his safety because he started to receive death threats.
At that point, I was really, really scared because they were actually asking for me to be killed. And yeah, there are some people out there who would do it, and they would feel that they're doing a religious obligation.
David wasn't ashamed of who he was. Even in the face of threats, he stayed authentic.
At the opposite end of the spectrum is Argentina. Argentina is a country where 92% of the population identifies as Catholic. Yet, Argentina has LGBT laws that are even more progressive than here in the US. In 2010, Argentina became the first country in Latin America and the 10th in the world to adopt marriage equality. There we met Maria Rashid. Maria was the driving force behind that movement.
Digo que en realidad los efectos del matrimonio igualitario no son solamente para las parejas que se casan, son para un montón de personas que aunque no se casen nunca, van a ser percibidas por los compañeros de trabajo, por la familia, por los vecinos, de otra manera a partir de este mensaje de igualdad del Estado nacional. Me siento muy orgullosa de Argentina porque Argentina hoy es un modelo de igualdad. y ojalá muy pronto tengamos en todo el mundo los mismos derechos con los mismos nombres.
When we made the visit to my ancestral lands, I wish I could have shown my parents what we found there. Because here is who we met. 1, 2, 3. Welcome days to Shanghai. A whole community of young, beautiful Chinese LGBT people. Sure, they had their struggles, but they were fighting it out. In Shanghai, I had the chance to speak to a local lesbian group and tell them our story in my broken Mandarin Chinese. In Taipei, each time we got onto the metro, we saw yet another lesbian couple holding hands. And we learned that Asia's largest LGBT pride event happens just blocks away from where my grandparents live. If only my parents knew.
By the time we finished our not-so-straight journey around the world, we had traveled 50,000 miles and logged 120 hours of video footage. We traveled to 15 countries and interviewed 50 super gays. Turns out, it wasn't hard to find them at all.
Yes, there are still tragedies that happen in the bumpy road to equality. And let's not forget that 75 countries still criminalize homosexuality today. But there are also stories of hope and courage in every corner of the world. What we ultimately took away from our journey is equality is not a Western invention.
One of the key factors in this equality movement is momentum. Momentum is more and more people embrace their full selves and use whatever opportunities they have to change their part of the world. And momentum as more and more countries find models of equality in one another. When Nepal protected against LGBT discrimination, India pushed harder. When Argentina embraced marriage equality, Uruguay and Brazil followed. When Ireland said yes to equality, the world stopped to notice. When the US Supreme Court makes a statement to the world that we can all be proud of.
As we reviewed our footage, what we realized is that we were watching a love story. It wasn't the love story that was expected of me, but it is one filled with more freedom, adventure, and love than I could have ever possibly imagined. 1 year after returning home from our trip, marriage equality came to California. And in the end, we believe love will win out.
By the power vested in me, by the state of California, and by God Almighty, I now pronounce you spouses for life. You may kiss.
You need the...
Hello, everybody. Thank y'all again for coming. We are super excited y'all are here. And we are about to hear from Professor Allison, and she has taught management courses here at Georgia College for 15 years. And she also teaches a global pride course here. So, Dr. Allison, you can take the floor.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? Great. Okay, that was a great video. I really enjoyed that. I'm going to be a little bit self-indulgent and kind of give my background, my story. When I was in my mid-20s, I had decided I wanted to come out as a trans woman, but that was in the late 80s, and that was not a good time to do that. So I put her away for 30-something years. But then, as you said, I'm 15 years at Georgia College. In July of 2019, I came out as a trans woman, and kind of interesting little process to go through. But it's, you know, also as far as relative to pride, and a lot of pride, global pride or any other pride, to a certain extent, you talk about things like Stonewall. Just so happens in June, which was a month before I came out, I went to a meetup with some trans people I knew in Atlanta at Sephora in Lenox Mall, and me and another friend, I for the first time ever in Atlanta, I presented as myself. And we, after the event was over, we took MARTA down to downtown, and we participated in the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Parade that was held, little march that was held in downtown Atlanta. And about the same month that I came out at work, a friend of mine introduced me to the Atlanta Freedom Band. And I had played bass drum in high school, and they said they needed a bass drummer, and I used to play bass drum 100 years ago. And so it was a wonderful situation where I not only got to get introduced to the trans community, but also the LGBT community. And so I'm very much glad to be able to be part of the Atlanta Freedom Band, which is Atlanta's Pride Band. The first parade we did was the Beltline Parade in Atlanta in 2019. We also did, for the Pride at Atlanta in November, we led the Trans March, and that's a picture from that. And on the day of Pride, which was on Sunday, it rained. So there's me with the percussion section. And that's one of the last people I came out to was about the same time was my mother. So anyway, so I guess the first thing that I thought to talk about in terms of global pride is parade. And I thought it's important to talk about the difference between a parade and a march. The Stonewall Riots occurred in 1969 in June. They lasted for several days. And then to this day, there continues to be events to commemorate that event. So beginning in 1970 was the first ever, the other, New York City had the Christopher Street Liberation Day, and other cities across the country also had their days. Now, if we look at, hopefully this will work. And so leading up to now, 51 years later, we have many global events all over the world. And so here's, I know that Wiki is something that we should not rely on too much, but sometimes it's good to get some quick figures. So here's the Wiki on largest LGBT events. And the two biggest ones were in that same month in June of 2019 was where New York City had a biggest global pride parade, which was 4 million people, between 4 and 5 million people. But you will note that other places in the world have large parades. São Paulo in Brazil has several times has had parades of the same size. So these are really large events. If you look down the list, you'll see many of them are in Europe. Toronto's also a big place. We had some of my friends from the band go to Toronto Pride, and they say it's about 2 or 3 times bigger than the Atlanta Pride Parade, and it's a different kind of thing. And so one of these days I hope to be able to go to that. But then you'll see other cities around the world have their Pride events. And of course, this is a wiki that's probably not necessarily real accurate, but as far as the numbers go, but at least it gives you kind of a snapshot that there's not a lot of Asian countries, not a lot of African countries represented here. Anyway, so back to my, oh gosh, what is it? Hold on, figure out where here we go. Back to my slide here. So, and then here's a story I found from 2020 where 200 people were arrested in the Philippines during their Pride Parade. So for some of these Pride parades, it's a parade, it's a celebration. But for others of them, it's a protest, and the people that are participating are subject to arrest because it's not legal in that country to be LGBT. My personal experience has been with the Atlanta Pride in November of 2019. And this is where to talk about the difference between a march and a parade. On Saturday, we have the marches. There's the Trans March. And with the Trans March, that is, for trans rights. And that's much more a sense of things have a ways to go with trans rights as opposed to LGBT. So on Sunday, the big parade is that parade starts at 11 o'clock in the morning and at 4 o'clock is still going. So it's just a huge number of people, whereas the Trans March is smaller. In 2019, being part of the band, the percussion section was asked to lead the march because in previous years where there were times when the protesters, if you look over here on the right, you'll see some protesters that tend to show up in Atlanta at all the parades. And in this particular people, they put up their posters on how evil we are, Pride people are. And then we have the Posey parade that tries to, hold up flowers to block out their signs, but they're very loud and they have bullhorns and they make a lot of noise. So that's why the percussion section is asked to lead the Trans March. And we were also, the Atlanta Freedom Band was also the third group in the Sunday parade, and Stacey Abrams was our Grand Marshal. I didn't realize, but last year they did have a Trans March. I thought because of COVID that everything was canceled. The band wasn't in it, but there was one then. So again, globally, we do celebrate Pride a lot of places, but still in some places it's more of a march than it is a parade. Then if we talk about, and I want to kind of quickly go through this because it's again, I'm going to, bow down to the wiki, but this wiki is actually pretty good. I was really amazed because I never really went down to the bottom of the page, and this has 19 global maps. And the wonderful thing about these global maps is that they can kind of give you a real quick snapshot, and they're current, because I know some fairly recent legislation that's happened in the United States, and those things have changed. So people are doing and in addition to that, at the very bottom, they show the actual legislation that's driving the map. So this is laws regarding same-sex by country and territory. So you go anywhere from marriage laws in the dark blue to the dark orange, where in Islamic countries where it's death or prison, to have same-sex intercourse. Then you see the United Nations. These are all countries that supported the United Nations resolution. All the blue ones are countries that support the United Nations resolution for LGBT rights. And there's an opposing proposal that certain other countries have supported, and then other countries aren't supporting either one. Then we see certain countries have laws that prohibit homosexual propaganda, and have morality laws, meaning that if you can be fined or imprisoned for posting positive things about LGBT folks. Russia and Northern Africa in that. Then you have the kind of the history of when same-sex marriage or same-sex relations, not marriage, same-sex relations was decriminalized. So purple is the most recent, and so you see some countries is still not is still criminalized, and you see in the United States that some states took longer than other states, and so again I'm going to try to go through this. Issues about age of consent laws that were different for same-sex couples versus heterosexual couples, legal status of same-sex marriage, and the dark blues. You'll see a pattern here. Adoption by same-sex couples, where it's allowed and where it's not allowed. You see there's some issues with some of the European countries. Military, LGBT service in the military, whether it is are banned or whether they can serve. So you see how that is set up. And we know that with the Trump administration, Obama allowed trans folks into the military in 2016, and then Trump banned it. And then President Biden has put it back in, so that map can change over time. Employment discrimination protection in these countries. anti-discrimination laws in terms of who you sell your products to, where you're allowed to discriminate or whether you're not allowed to. The purple ones and the blue ones, you cannot discriminate against people on who you sell your products to. There's a law that's coming up with the Supreme Court as to whether or not Catholic adoption agencies will be able to prohibit their children going to same-sex couples. So it's the same, that sort of thing. Constitutionally protected discrimination is not in the United States Constitution, but it is in Mexico and Canada and a few other countries. Hate crimes, as to whether LGBT hate crimes are protected. Incitement of hatred prohibited in some countries. Ban on conversion therapy. It's not banned in the United States. It's only banned in some states in the United States. So you can still have conversion therapy. Immigration, is there immigration allowed into countries? These countries in blue allow people to be accepted into the country because of LGBT discrimination. And of course, you can tell from the other maps as to which countries they're being discriminated against. Bans on same-sex unions. There's a constitutional ban in Russia, Africa, and some South American and Asian countries. Blood donations is to prohibit men who have sex with men from giving blood, kind of a leftover from HIV crisis. Gender identity. So here are laws where you're legally allowed to change your identity. Some places like Georgia require that you have the surgery in order to legally change your identity, whereas some places you don't, and others you can't change anything or it's unknown. So we get into the last two are pretty much gender identity. Countries where where non-binary genders are acknowledged. A few states and Canada, and but not very much. So we still have a long way to go with non-binary. In addition to that, things can be a lot different based on what country you're in. For example, did you know one of the best places to get any kind of sexual surgery on sexual change, reassignment? Iran. Now, why would Iran, a Muslim country where it's actually criminal to have sex with same sex? And the reason is because there was a fatwa that was issued that said that yes, it is, if someone is desiring of having sex with a man, then that is bad. But if they transition to a woman, then that's okay. And so that resulted in over 20, 30-year period in Iran developing a very strong and sophisticated process of having sexual reassignment, because of course the assumption is that anybody that's trans wants to have sex with all trans women want to have sex with men, which isn't true, because sexual identity is different than gender identity. I don't know if you've heard about the J.K. Rowling thing in England, where England is being referred to as TERF Island, and the issue has to do with transgender exclusionary radical feminists who feel that transgender people are not really men or are not really women. And so this has gotten into a very heated debate. It's a heated debate in the UK, but it's not as heated a debate in other parts of the world. And so you figure a country as generally liberal as the UK would be, why is this happening? And so it's just a fascinating phenomenon to study. But then and so I trying to be limited on talking real fast. Arkansas just passed 2 laws, one limiting trans sports and the other impacting I believe healthcare to trans children. if you go to the ACLU website, you can see that there's probably 25 other states that are working on different kinds of legislation that they're trying to pass. And so anyway, that's kind of just the first part of my presentation, is just to say, to a certain extent, you have to look at every country's different. Every country has history. Almost every country has a history of LGBT, but more recent history is not as positive as some of the older histories. And so I would like to have the opportunity for the students that are in my class to be able to give their impressions of some of the things that they learned in our class that they want to share with you all.
I can start. Okay, my name's Lauren, and I'm in the GC2Y Global Pride, and some of the things that we do are actually really cool. So instead of like being like on a strict deadline of like what countries you get to research, you get to pick your own. So I've learned a lot about, for instance, the first thing we did was Poland. So I learned that Poland was a very negative country towards LGBTQ community, and like the second country me and my group picked was Germany, which is really cool because I'm a little German. So you kind of just get to learn about countries you're interested in rather being on a strict like agenda. So it's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also in the GC2Y class, and my name is Anna Grace, and we get to do research assignments based on certain projects. So one of our main research assignments that we normally do is whenever a group is presenting, we'll have an assignment where we have to find 10 links and spend an hour researching. And so I think that's very beneficial because you go into class knowing a little bit about what you're going to learn that day about a certain country. And then we also have other assignments that are more like kind of like essays. And we recently did one over the controversy of the Latinx population, and like using that term to identify Hispanic and Latino or Latina individuals. So this class has like really opened up my eyes to some of the stigmas about pride and LGBTQ individuals.
Thank you.
I'm also in the GC2I class, and I think that it's very important to learn about just different like cultures and like how different countries kind of have like laws about certain things and how different countries treat people of the LGBT community. So I think that's very important, just to learn about other cultures and other countries like that. And this class is like centered around that. And we learn about so many different countries, and like it's kind of interesting how we kind of compare like what the United States is like, kind of what we know, and also what like countries like Japan or like the Netherlands are like, and just other countries that are pro-LGBT or not. I think it's a really cool concept to learn. It's really not something that you normally have in a college class, but I really think it's important for college students to learn.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm also in the GC2Y. Kind of going off what Natalie said, I think it's really interesting, like from everything that we've learned so far through the semester, like comparing not only the United States to other countries and places around the world, but one thing that's really interesting to me is how different these places can vary, even though they can be like really close to each other. Like I can't really think of an example necessarily, but like some places are just really harsh on the LGBTQ plus community, and then other places are extremely accepting. But it's just been really eye-opening to see all the differences around the world and how people have to deal with that daily.
Thank you. Please speak.
Hey, my name is Rosa, and I'm also in the GC2Y class. This class has opened my eyes a lot with the LGBT plus community and what the different countries have to go through to fight for their rights. it has also opened my eyes to see how much hate crime is still going on towards the Pride community, and how religion and political attitudes play a role to the acceptance of the LGBTQ plus community.
Thank you. Come on.
My teammate Becca's mic isn't working, but she texted me what she wanted to say. So she said that she likes this class because of GCSU is known as like a liberal arts college. So by like providing this course, we're allowed the privilege to learn about different communities and differences between sexual orientation, gender identity, and like the whole LGBTQ community. So that's from Rebecca McKinnon.
Okay. There are others. If you want to get credit, you're supposed to speak. It's been a kind of a shy class. Okay, well, thank you. Let me go back to my presentation. Again, I really, how do you explain global pride in 30 minutes? It's kind of a impossible task, but I thought I would hit the high points. And so you think about parades and pride, and you think about legislation. A couple other things I thought we should discuss is travel. If you're going to travel, you need to do your homework. And that means you need to look at which countries you're going to be going to in terms of your circumstances. And you need to recognize that not only where you're going to actually go to be on vacation, but you also need to be concerned about changing planes in certain countries. Like they say, some of the best flights to somewhere is like through Dubai. And you may not want to necessarily be at the airport in Dubai because things can go sour if you're not careful, and you can end up in jail. So a couple of websites that I've linked here, and if anybody wants a copy of my PowerPoint, happy to share it. The U.S. government has travel support websites to kind of just help you in general, but they also have advice for LGBT folks as well, specific advice. I also found a very helpful article. It's different, sexual orientation and gender identity are two very different things, and that's very important in terms of travel, right? If it's sexual orientation that's an issue, it's more a matter of, certain behaviors that are illegal, right? And so you need to be sensitive to that when you travel to different countries. Whereas if it's gender identity, then that's really more about some of aspects of your physicality, right? So you have to be you have to be concerned if you're trans and you're traveling, yet if your gender marker does not necessarily match physically certain aspects of yourself when you go through the inspections and stuff like that, that can cause trouble in certain countries. And so you just can't assume that just because you're at the airport, everything's safe, and that people, the TSA agents all over the world, whatever they call themselves, are knowledgeable of trans folks. And so people that have gender markers that do not necessarily match what might happen in a pat down or an inspection, that can run into issues in certain countries, as well as there are other issues having to do with carrying hormones and other kinds of things, which in some countries can be considered to be controlled substances. So again, a friend of mine, year and a half ago said, "Hey, you ought to go to Jamaica with me." And I was like, okay, I've always heard Jamaica was a really fun place. And then one of the first presentations that the class did was on Jamaica, and we learned that Jamaica was probably not a very good place for me to go travel in terms of how the people in Jamaica feel about LGBT folks. So again, you need to be very careful about where you travel and how you act and what to expect. Just, and it's also helpful to look at different websites that can tell you about news stories about different parts of the world. It's good to keep up with current events. So in terms of the course, I started out with a fairly simple model where we were going to profile a country based on history, the past, the present, and the future, and kind of talk about, different kinds of things like that. And what we found was that some of these things like history overlaps with acceptance and opposition. Some of these things kind of get all kind of jumbled around. So then I'm not going to scare anybody, but this is the new model that we came up with, which is a little bit more, basically, if you're going to profile a country, you talk about the country in terms of straight folks, in terms of the history of the country, what it's like in terms of religion, politics, etc. Talk about what it's like to vacation there, and talk about what it would be like to be an expatriate if you wanted to go live there. And then you compare that to if you go to that country as a queer person, then how that might be different. And so that's the general full-blown model. I don't think any of the teams are going to be able to completely populate the entire model, but that gives you kind of a sense of how we're profiling the countries to think about, trying to say as much as we can where it's pertinent for that particular country. Everything is not important for every country. We tried to pick we got 6 continents. So we were going to pick a supportive country for every continent and an unsupportive country. And they were going to do presentations. So we got 6 teams doing 2 presentations. So that's 12 presentations. So in North America, they picked Canada and Jamaica, positive, supportive and non-supportive. Then they picked Netherlands and Poland. Then they did Japan and Malaysia. Then they did Brazil and Argentina. And we found out that Argentina is actually probably more positive than Brazil. So South America is pretty supportive. On one hand, South America is pretty supportive, but on the other hand, there's a lot of trans women getting killed in Brazil. So that's a concern to be sensitive to. South Africa, we got South Africa. That's probably about almost the only one you can do in Africa that's supportive, and then Egypt. And then for Oceania, we picked Australia and Papua New Guinea, just because we were trying to, there's not that many countries in Oceania. Anyway, and so the teams are also doing a project where they're profiling, with that big model, they're profiling one country. They got to pick their own countries, so you can see they kind of wanted to go to places that would be pretty comfortable to live in, like England, France, Germany, Greece, Norway, and Mexico. And during the course of the semester, we have about 10 different speakers who talk about, and some of them are going to or have spoken about their experiences being LGBT, traveling to or living in Spain, Costa Rica, India, Nigeria, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Italy, France, United States, just kind of throwing out different places that they've been. And so it's been an exciting semester. I really appreciate the opportunity to teach this class. I think that's everything. So I'm open for questions now. If that's,
I have a question. I'm not in the class though. My friend told me to join.
Okay.
What do you think is the biggest way that we could help, or I'm straight, so I don't know everything about the gay community, but I want to help other people feel more included and not feel like outcasts sometimes, as some of my friends have explained to me.
Okay, am I still sharing my screen? I'm sorry, I'm confused. Look, I'll answer your question in just a second, but I'm trying to figure out where the Zoom call went. Am I still sharing my screen?
You are. Yes, ma'am.
I can't figure out where the button is to say stop sharing your screen. Okay, thank you.
There you go.
All right, I'm sorry, I got a little bit of a tizzy. Okay, all right. I mean, that's a great question. And I guess I'll start out from my own personal perspective. Especially, I've been around a long time. I hear what the guys say about trans people, and before I came out, and so I know that they say that stuff to this day, and I assume they say it about me, and I just can't think about that. I can't worry about that. But it really does. It is really helpful when people, if someone misgenders you or uses your dead name, if someone misgenders me in a meeting or uses my dead name in a meeting, when I'm in the meeting, I will, I get tired of having to correct them. And there's nothing that is more, makes you feel better than when someone else corrects them instead of you having to do it. It's most of the time it's not on purpose. It's just by habit. I mean, they've been working with me for 14 years. So, I mean, they're used to the old stuff, but it really is positive. And then the other thing, and this is much harder when that person is not around and you're with, your buddies or whatever, and they start talking like they talk, to come to that person's defense. And to some people I know, they say things like, oh, that was when they were him, and that was when, that was their name, and, those kinds of things, to treat the people with respect. And that goes a long way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I will do those things.
It's an act of bravery, and like I said, especially amongst old men, to say stuff like that, they frown on that. More questions, please. I'm kind of having an issue here with I have a global pride class that is on the class schedule for May, and but there's only 9 students in it. I'm not sure that I can really do a class with that smaller number of students. I do plan on teaching it in the spring, but it is kind of concerning to me that I may have to ask those students to wait till the spring to take the class. And I hope that isn't going to feel like I'm letting down the community or anything like that. Anybody have a feeling, impression about that?
I know my friend Kara really wanted to take your global pride class because I suggested it to her, but she couldn't do it because it was on main campus. And I think a lot of the freshmen don't want to sign up for a GC2Y class in the fall that's on campus because they have nowhere to live. Like maybe if it was online, I know my friend Kara would join in a heartbeat, and I'm sure a lot of other freshmen who are going to be sophomores would too.
Yeah, it was a weird thing that the university decided they would only offer 3 GC2Y classes, and they all had to be in May, and they all had to be face-to-face, which you wonder, well, that's an interesting strategy during COVID. And so, I volunteered to do that. But I didn't know whether, I didn't know whether there'd be enough people that wanted to take a face-to-face class in May. And so I definitely plan on offering just a regular class like I did this semester, face-to-face in spring. So people be able to take it then.
I'll let her know. Thank you.
And I am teaching a freshman GC1Y, the Pride Movement course in fall, which is full. So that's exciting. Okay, well, thank you for listening to me. I really appreciate it.
There's one more question that someone put in the chat, and they said, what LGBTQ movement has been the most impactful for the LGBTQ community?
Well, the biggest one is the thing that came up around, the around Stonewall. It was I mean, basically they took things from what was going on with civil rights movement, and also with the feminist movement and the radicalism of that, and they brought that into that would have been in the early 60s, and they took the Gay Liberation Front kind of took things over based on Stonewall, and they turned things into radical protests kind of thing, which helped gain some rights. It was, of course, it was not an easy, even though they had those positive things going on during that time, where we weren't being as persecuted as we had been. Then we had the AIDS crisis hit in 80 and throughout the 80s to the mid 90s, and that kind of, the Reagan administration basically did nothing, and people saw that as well. It's probably not a bad thing for this to have happened, which is very sad. And so it's hard for me to pinpoint, it's just been a very, very slow process. But you have things like, like the Atlanta Pride ban. Why do we have the Atlanta Pride ban? The Atlanta Pride ban is to be visibly queer and to be doing positive things. And, and so that aspect of things is another way of, of lifting things up. Did I show you my email?
Well, thank you, Dr. Miller. Thank you so much for sharing with us. We are now going to move into a trivia Kahoot, so get ready for that.
All right.
In case anybody's struggling with getting into the Kahoot, just kahoot.it, type in the code and type in your name, and you're all good. We'll start it shortly. Okay, is that everybody? All right, let's start it. When was the first Pride event? Good job. 1970 was when the first Pride event happened. A lot more people got that right than I thought they would, but yeah. All right, true or false? By the 80s, most U.S. cities held a Pride March. We got a 50-50 shot on this one. Wow, a lot more people thought it was false, but you know, it's all right. Pride is about what? Wow, 22 people got it right. I'm impressed. So far, Rebecca's at the top of the leaderboard. Let's see what happens. By what year did cities start holding pride marches? Let's see, is Rebecca still on top? She is. She is. Hold on. On what day did the Stonewall Inn become the focal point of the queer revolution? Good job. It's why Pride Month is in June. Emmy up top now. Rebecca fell a little bit. She's going to have to try to fight that way back up. Let's see what happens. What month is Pride Month? I might have just given this answer away, but it's okay.
You know why Atlanta Pride's in November? Because it's too hot in June.
Everyone got that one right. There you go. True or false? Pride's inception is directly associated with political unrest and violence towards the LGBTQ plus community. True. Last question. Let's see what happens. More than multi-selection. Who led the queer community to fight back on the night of the Stonewall bar raid? Was it Beyonce? Was it Miss Major? Was it Marsha P. Johnson? Or was it Sylvia Rivera? It was everyone but Beyonce, unfortunately. Let's see, the podium is in bronze, JC. Silver, Jay. And in first, Dav. Good job, everybody. That was good.
Okay, that is all that we have for you guys today. Thank you so much for joining, and we hope you all learned something and enjoyed our event. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Yay.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you again, Professor Allison. Have a good one.